Hello and welcome to the second part of my little tutorial series. This part will mainly be about editing RAW files, but I also want to explain why I really want to encourage you to use the RAW format. For editing, I will use Adobe Camera Raw, which is a part of Photoshop, but it's very similar to other RAW converters like Lightroom, for example. Of course, every image is different, so there's not really a point in just copying my settings, and that's why I want to try to explain to you why I use those settings and in which situations I make use of them. The process of editing images for a time-lapse does not really differ from normal image editing, with a few exceptions. And I will tell you what you should avoid when editing images for time-lapse and how you can apply your settings to all your images in one go. But this video might also be interesting for you if you just want to learn how to edit images in Camera Raw. Since this one will be much longer as the first one, I will divide it into 2 chapters so you can quickly jump to the editing part. I have chosen this image as an example. I captured it at noon, where you should actually avoid taking pictures because of the light conditions. And you see it doesn't look very great. But how you can still achieve this result, I will show you in this video. So let's get started. But before we start with editing, I want to tell you a few things about RAW images. If you are familiar with RAW files, you can skip this part and jump to the editing. If you can't open your RAW files, go to this website, link is in the video description, and click on Show All Downloads. There's the Sony RAW driver for Microsoft Windows. So just download this and install it. And then you should be able to open the RAW files. If you use the RAW format for the first time and you get a result like this, you will probably be disappointed. I mean, it was a hot summer day with a clear blue sky, and in the image the sky looks hazy and those sunlit patches on the ground, they are almost completely white. The colors look pale and the shadows are almost completely black. So the image looks clearly different from what I remember it looked like when I captured it. And this is the point where many people think, well, after all, it wasn't a very expensive camera, maybe I should spend more to get a better result. And the answer is no, you won't get a much better result. So are camera sensors still so bad that they can't keep up with our eyes? And the answer is again no. There is an important point to understand. We don't really see with our eyes, we actually see with our brains. Our eyes capture an image, but our brain does a kind of post-processing to it before we really perceive it. And since there's no way of seeing the unedited image of our eyes, we think that this already edited image is real and natural. You can see this especially if you take a picture at noon, because then almost all cameras will have a really hard time of producing a decent result, because of the light conditions. So even if you see a clear blue sky, the sky in your image, if you use RAW, will probably be white. If you use JPEG, the camera will edit those images automatically without you noticing it. But this will give you always a somehow average result, and since JPEG is compressed, your possibilities for post-processing are very limited. RAW images may not look as good at first because they're unedited, but they have all informations we need stored inside them. We only have to make them visible. Let me show you the differences between RAW and JPEG with an example. So here is an unedited RAW image, and as you can see, the sky, especially if you look through the gate, is overexposed. But after editing in Camera Raw, I got this result. And you see, the sky is now blue as you would see it in reality. Okay, maybe it looks a bit better. And then I created a JPEG out of my unedited RAW image, and I applied exactly the same settings to it. And now you see, The sky doesn't look so bright blue anymore, it's almost gray. And that's because JPEG can't provide enough information to restore the original color. So that's why I recommend to use the RAW format, especially in tricky light conditions. And now I will show you how to edit those. If Photoshop shows you an error message when you try to open RAW files, you have to download the latest version of Camera Raw. Go to this website, link is in the video description, and download and install this update. So now let's come to the actual editing of our images. Since I don't have the original RAW files of my time-lapse anymore, I will use this one as an example, and I copied it 20 times to kind of simulate a time-lapse. So let's select all of those and drag and drop those into Photoshop. And they open automatically in Camera Raw. On the left side we have a list of all our images, and the top one is the one we will edit now. And note that editing a RAW file in Camera Raw is a non-destructive process. Everything you do can be changed at any time without any loss in quality. You might be shocked because of this clearly visible distortion, but this is actually the image exactly like the camera captured it, without any editing. The a6000 corrects it so you don't notice it, but we can do this also very quickly and more accurately. Let's go to Lens Correction, Profile, and check Enable Lens Profile Correction. And you see, it recognized the lens I used and corrected its distortion and vignette, because the information for this is stored in the RAW file. But there's something you should know about this. Let's zoom into the center and look closely at those leaves. Here they look perfectly normal, but if we go into a corner, you see they are blurry and distorted. And that's because Photoshop performs the opposite distortion to correct the lens distortion. So that's one of the downsides of the 16 to 50mm kit lens, but if we zoom out, it's hardly noticeable. Now I normally go to Basic and start with the white balance. And let's just try some options here, like Auto, but this is much too yellow for my taste. And Daylight, this looks actually good. We can also try some other ones, but they don't make really sense since it wasn't cloudy or so. I take Daylight, but I want to compare it to the default setting, and yes, Daylight looks much better. So those options are actually only presets for the temperature and tint slider. I always try to fix problematic areas in the image at first, so I don't use those options one after another. But let me show you what I want to achieve by using the exposure. If we slide this to the left, the sky looks now perfect. It got all its color back, but the shadowed areas are now too dark. And if we slide it to the right, the sky is overexposed, but the shadowed areas are now much better. So this doesn't work. We need something which takes care of the over and underexposed areas without affecting the whole image. And we can do this by using the highlights and shadows. So let's slide the highlights way over here. And now the sky looks already much better. And we can also brighten up the dark areas. Like this. But now the image is a little bit pale. So let's increase the contrast a bit. A bit more. We can also use the whites to make our sky a bit darker. It's actually always good to play around with those sliders. You might get something you like. And the blacks, I think I just leave it at 0, so just type in 0. And now the clarity. This will increase the contrast and also gives you this kind of metallic look. It looks sometimes nice, but in this case, maybe just a little bit. The vibrance is very similar to the saturation, but if you slide it completely to the left, you still have a bit of color in it. And that's because vibrance does not work linear like saturation. It decreases the saturation of already much saturated areas less as others. I like it a bit more as saturation. And maybe a bit less exposure, but I want to have brighter shadows. This makes those areas a bit brighter. Let's go to the next. And this is the tone curve, where you can also adjust the lights and darks, but I don't like the results so much, so I use it very seldom. Let's go to detail. There's the sharpening option. And since this will also increase the noise in my image, I want to determine which areas will get sharpened and which not. And we can do this by going to masking, but if you use the slider, you see no effect. You actually have to press and hold the Alt key to make it visible. And now it's very easy. The white areas will get sharper and the black areas will be ignored. To avoid making the noise more noticeable, try to sharpen only the outlines in your image. Now we can increase the amount, but let's zoom in before we do it to see the effect a bit better. Since we are using masking, we can actually use a very high value. So that looks good. A lower radius means it will sharpen more the details, and a higher it will sharpen wider areas. I usually use something between 1 and 1.3. Details will either focus sharpening more on structures or on the outline. The noise reduction, I don't have much noise in this image. It occurs more if you use a long-time exposure or a high ISO. So you can play around with those, but be careful. If you use a very high value, you will lose details in your image. In this case, I won't use it at all. So those three, hue, saturation, and luminance, are great options for individual color correction. So I start with hue and zoom out. So this allows us to change the hue of every single color. If we take the reds and slide it to the left, the red areas change their color to pink, and only the red ones. If we slide it into the opposite direction, it gets orange. So that's usually not a really desired effect, but if we use just a hint of it, we get some nice results. And it really only changes the current used color. You see it actually even better with the orange slider. By changing the green, for example, into yellow, the image looks like taken in autumn. So just play around with those. With saturation, we can again adjust every single color separately, but this time the sliders will affect the saturation. I think I increased the saturation of the reds a bit, because it's also painted in a rich red tone. And I also increased the blue a bit, but not too much, because I prefer to get the original color by darkening the sky instead of oversaturate the blue. And we can do this by using luminance. So here are again sliders for all colors, and this time they will only affect the brightness of a color. Let me show you by sliding the red over here, and it gets darker, but not very much. But that's because the color of the temple gate is not a pure red, there's also orange mixed in it. I will make it a bit brighter, and maybe also a tiny bit of orange. And again, just play around with those, sliding them to the left and right. Do you see the effect of those golden ornaments beneath the roof? If we make the yellows brighter, they look much more shiny like metal. Those are fine. And now finally, let's fix the sky by making the blue darker. Well, not too much. I think this looks good. And we don't seem to have those colors at all. The split toning option is very interesting. It will give your image a kind of cinematic look, but it can be a bit tricky at first to get good results. You see the use of these split toning options actually in almost every movie. So here are 3 screenshots for you, and you see quite clearly that there's always one dominating color in those images. But you don't really notice it while watching. So this is done because less colors are more relaxing for your eyes, and also it can increase the feeling if the scene is in a cold or in a warm area. But of course they don't use Photoshop for it. So let me show you how to do this. You can adjust the hue of the highlights and the shadows separately, but you will only see the effect by using a higher saturation. It doesn't work very well with this image because we have already 3 dominating colors in it, and this is red, green and blue. So just to give you an example, I exaggerate a bit. So this could be for a cold winter image. You can also use the balance slider to balance between highlights and shadows. If you use this split toning option, use it sparingly and not too much saturation. It's also easier to use similar colors for the highlights and shadows, or use only one of those. You should also try to reduce the vibrance a bit before. I won't use it now. And now to the lens correction. And there are some options we haven't used yet. And that's remove chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration, let me zoom in a bit. Chromatic aberration are those red and turquoise spots between the leaves. They appear especially in corners and depend also on the lens you use. So you see we don't have any in the center, but in the corners they are clearly visible. We can try to remove those automatically, and it's better, but they're still visible. So let's try to remove those manually with the purple and green slider. And this is already much better. The slider below determines the range of the color that will be removed, but if you're not careful, you might remove also other colors. Just to show you this by using the green slider, and well, you see the result. With transform, you can adjust the distortion if you are not satisfied with the lens correction. And you can also remove or add a vignette. But I rather use the next option for this, and those are the effects. The first is dehaze. You can use this to remove or add a bit of fog. And with add grain, you can make it look like an old image. You should use the post-crop vignette if you, like me, already cropped the image. The vignette will darken the corners of your image, which is actually mostly an unwanted effect of your lens, but I kind of like it in some cases. You can also make some more adjustments if you want. And now we're almost done. If you're not satisfied with the color profile of your camera, you can adjust it here. I never use it. So now there are still those tools at the top I want to show you. Like zoom, move, the eyedropper, and very important, the crop tool. And as you see, I use a crop of 16:9, but since this is a RAW file, I can always change it, and I don't lose those areas like in a normal image. You can also rotate or use one of those presets by clicking and hold. Let's reset this. Also very useful is the straighter tool. Just create a line at an edge you want to be straight, and it will align the image to it. So the border of my cropped area is now parallel to the selected line. You can apply this by hitting enter. And there we go, now it's straight. There's also the remove tool. Let's remove this bird. And it tries to find a similar area to copy it over the selected spot. And the bird vanished. But it's not very accurate. If you look closely, you see it copied the fence where actually this black thing should be. And really never ever use this option for time-lapse, because it will choose a slightly different spot in every image, and this will result in an annoying flicker effect. So let's undo this. But for images it's fine. Remove red eyes, that's for portraits, I can't use it here. The adjustment brush lets you adjust a specific region of your image, and you can change the size. And with the feather slider, the smoothness of the brush. Now I have defined two regions with my brush, and I can now apply all those settings like exposure, highlights, color temperature to just this area. This little red dot indicates the point where I started to draw, and by right-clicking delete I can remove it. The grade weighted filter works very similar, but now we create a gradient. The green dot shows the start, and the red dot shows the end of the gradient. I will use it to make the sky a bit darker. Let me just type in 0 everywhere. And again, play around with those. You can also try to change the temperature and change the size of our gradient. And we could as well darken the highlights of the ground a bit. And adjust the temperature again. I don't want it to be blue. And reduce the highlights. So I think we are done. Let's compare this to the original image. And that's quite a difference, isn't it? You see the sky is now actually blue like it should be. And we see also more details in the shadows. And we removed the lens distortion. So click a few times to get back. And now we have to apply our settings to every other image. So make sure the edited image is selected and press Ctrl A. Go to this menu and click Sync Settings. And now we can choose which settings we want to synchronize to every image. For a time-lapse, we want them all to be exactly the same. So let's select all or click on Check All. OK. And on the left you see it applies those settings to all images. So now all RAW files are finished, but the software to convert those into video can't handle RAW files, so we have to convert those images, and let's also downscale them to our final resolution. This will speed up our video editing process. Make sure the aspect ratio of your image is 16:9. At least you have to use the same ratio as your final resolution, otherwise your images will get stretched. So click on Save Image. I recommend a lossless format like TIFF. No compression. I use this color space, and make sure you use an 8-bit channel, because 16 is really not necessary since we finished editing, and this would really slow down the video editing and increase the image size too. I want to resize the image, and I already typed in a 4K resolution, but you could also use 1920 to 1080. So this should be the resolution of your final video. Select the folder where you want to save it, and click on Save. Photoshop will now convert all your images, and depending on the amount, this can take a very long time, up to several hours. But you can click on Done and do something else in the meantime. As long as you don't close Photoshop, it will continue to convert those images. After Photoshop has finished, you will end up with this. And now we have 2 more files in here. The first one, of course, is our raw image. The second one, the edited and converted TIFF image. And in the third are all settings stored we made in Camera Raw, which means our original RAW file is still untouched. And if you want to have the original RAW file back, you can just delete the XMP file. So that's it for the second one. Thanks for watching, and in the next one I will show you how you can convert all your images into a video, how we can add several scenes and add music. So I hope I see you on the next one.